Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Lorna. I'm the Service Manager here at Éist Cancer Support Centre. I'd just like to welcome everyone here this morning for our official launch and opening of the new centre. We're absolutely blessed with the weather, so we had a good evening last night and an even better day to come today, especially with Vincent being here to talk about the Vicky Phelan Portrait. I just want everyone to know that Eist is here to offer emotional support and practical help to anyone that's affected by cancer. Okay? We have a number of services here at the centre. So if you know anyone that's going through cancer, we provide a range of services including counselling, manual lymphatic drainage, breast care, reflexology and telephone support calls. We also have a range of group support services including men's, women's and children's support groups. We have a bereavement group and a walking group. We also run wellbeing classes and courses throughout the year, so they consist of yoga, art therapy, mindfulness, prostate program and anxiety workshop. All our services here at the centre are free of charge, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the outstanding generosity from the community of Carlow. We fully rely on donations, sponsorship and fundraising, and we wouldn't be able to run our services without I suppose everyone's support from the community. And our service is here for the community and for the people of Carlow and the surrounding areas. So I suppose if you want to get in touch with us, you can simply drop into the centre Monday to Friday. We're here, so come on through the doors. You can also email us. You can phone us via our landline or our mobile phone. And I'm delighted to say that our new website is now live since Thursday. So you can now view our website at www.eistcarlowcancersupport.ie, and you can also contact us through social media. And also, you will also see our new brochures. Do I have any here to hand? We have new brochures distributed throughout the centre as well. So I'd like everyone to take away one with you. Spread the word about our centre here. It's fully accessible to the community, and I suppose there's not one person in Ireland who doesn't know someone that's been affected by cancer, and you know, that's what we're here for. We're here to support you and to let everyone know that you're not alone going through this. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Vincent Devine. Vincent is the artist that obviously did the Vicky Phelan Portrait, and Vincent is going to take us through Vicky's extraordinary story. So, over to you, Vincent. Thank you.
Before we start really quickly, do you mind if I close that window just with the road noise? And if we could just leave the door open, is that okay for everybody?
You could open the window.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, or is the top one Walter maybe? The top one is open anyway, so it is. Yeah, yeah, perfect.
Thanks. So thank you all very much for being here. The first thing I want to do is, I suppose, extend my thanks and for your time essentially, because time is something that I think we take for granted, and especially people that are going through what people are going through in Eist at the moment. And what I mean by that is that our time is valuable, and I want to make sure that you get something from the time we spend together over the next however long, 40-45 minutes doing this talk, and you get something from it. And I want to sincerely thank you all for being here. The owner of the painting as well, David Brennan, extends his apologies for not being able to be here. He was booked with something else, so he would love to have been here just to kind of give his part on when buying the painting, but I'll do my best to talk for David and what the whole process was. So what I'll do after I explain kind of the background, how the painting came about, is I'll take the sheets off one by one. It's a triptych, so it comes in 3 parts, so it's meant to be read from left to right, almost like a book. But I suppose I'll give you a little bit of background as to how the painting came about, and then I'll go through the painting and what the meaning is behind it, and in doing so it will essentially tell the story of Vicky's life and, you know, about her tenacity, her endurance and everything that goes with it. So what happened was I was working with the charity Heroes Aid, and we were doing a different project, and that project fell apart. And what happened was I had been painting other figures in history. These would have been art people, so it would have been a woman called Artemisia Gentileschi is her name, so a bit of a mouthful. And she was an Italian painter, and she was born in the 1600s. And what happened essentially was she was another woman that was very tenacious, became a powerhouse of Italian art, one of the first female painters in Italy at the time. And as I was speaking to the CEO of the charity, I could almost feel Artemisia looking at me when she mentioned about Vicky Phelan and about Vicky Phelan being on the board as a patient advocate. And it was at that stage I offered. I said I'd love to paint Vicky Phelan if she would be willing to sit for the portrait. So what happened was Vicky came to the studio, but she was almost reluctant to come. And when she came to the studio, there was no way she was sitting for that portrait, this portrait that you see right in front of you. There was absolutely no way she was sitting for it. And what happened was, when she seen my portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi, and she heard me telling her story, she kind of was so blown away by it, she said to me, that she said, well, if Vincent's offering one of those, I'm taking it. You know, I have my book, I have my memoir, so she goes, if he's offering a painting, I mean, I'll take the painting. So that's how it all came about. And it was only through the story of Artemisia, and I invite you to look her up. She's an incredible, incredible woman. And it was the telling of her story that essentially inspired Vicky to sit for this. So it was another woman inspiring another woman to carry on the story and the legacy. It really wasn't overly about me. It was just my ability, I suppose, to tell the story, which I hope you'll see the value in now in a few minutes. So what happened was I read Vicky's memoir, and I went through the memoir with a highlighter, and I highlighted all the parts that I found interesting. And then any questions I may have had, like we would all have reading the memoir. I don't know if many of you have read the memoir, but any questions I had, I would note down, and then I would go and follow up with Vicky when we would have the in-depth conversations and the meetings together up in the studio or down in Doonbeg. So what Vicky did was she gave me absolutely everything. There was no holds barred. It was whatever questions I had, she would answer with the honesty and integrity that you see her in the media with. There was nothing off the table. I could ask her any question. And what that did was it gave me such an insight into the depth of her character. It then meant I could handle everything about the portrait and about her life with the sensitivity needed to be dealt with. Because she went through the notes afterwards and she actually signed what she wanted to put in and what she didn't want to put in. So the painting was more of a collaboration. I can only take partial credit for how it ended up, because Vicky had came along and said, I want this in it, I want that in it, I don't want this in it, I want you to hide this in it, and then down the road then you can talk to people about this aspect of it. So it was very much collaboration. It wasn't just me going away and thinking up all the ideas. I went to Vicky and I said, what do you think about this? Even some things you'll see in the portrait, I couldn't think of an idea for it. And I went to Vicky and she said, what about this? So, I mean, it was an incredible experience for me, I know, as an artist, to have somebody come along and to be so interactive and interact with the piece so much. So what happened was, after we had the conversations, I said to Vicky, where's the painting going to be set? And she said, I want it set in Doonbeg. That's my favourite place in the whole world, where I want my ashes scattered. So she goes, I want it set in Doonbeg. So I arrived in between the lockdowns to Doonbeg, because she has a house just down the road from the beach. And Vicky thought I was going to come and maybe do sketches of the beach or watercolours and all this stuff. So I arrived with a deck chair. And I said to her, right, okay. And I put a deck chair on the beach in the surf. And I said, just sit in the chair there, we're going to do a photo shoot. And she went, what? I thought you were going to do the artist thing where you come and just do this. I said, no. I said, I'm a method artist. Like the Daniel Day-Lewis of art, right? I was like, no, you have to be. So the strange thing about sitting on the beach with her was she had very little makeup on. She looked so peaceful, so calm, and it was reflected in the surf, because Doonbeg is a surfing beach. It's a very, very tumultuous beach. So it's always thrown up big waves. And the evening we were there, it was the calmest she had ever seen it in years. And the colours you see in the painting are the colours that were there that night that we took the photo shoot. And she sat in the surf, it just lapped around her feet. And there was a poignancy with that, because it's set on the beach, but nothing that's in the surf or on the beach can ever stay. It's always going to be brought back out with the tide. And, you know, that's kind of why I think the setting for it is so much more poignant when you see it in flesh, you know, you see where it's set. So ultimately, it ended up on the Late Late Show, and me and Vicky had never seen it. Before she went to America, to do a clinical trial, which is why she was on the Late Late Show, just announced she was going and then showed the portrait and then raised money for frontline workers. She literally was brought into the Late Late Show and stood in front of her for 5 minutes and was pissed off to do the interview. So she never got a chance to absorb it really. She was off to America. And this is when it was painted. It was painted just when she was on her way to America. And we had no idea what the future would hold for Vicky, and even for where the painting was going to go. I mean, we didn't know where the painting was going to end up and what Vicky's life standard was going to be like afterwards. So it went to auction in Shepherd's in Durrow in County Laois, handled it, and it ended up raising €56,000, which was purchased by David Brennan. So there were several bidders in the room at that stage, and the main concern we had for it going to auction was if somebody would buy it, it would end up in a basement in London or somewhere else like that, and then somebody would try to sell it when Vicky passed away and cash in on it. And that was something we were all worried about, but it was kind of out of our hands. And for someone like David Brennan to come along and buy that painting to make sure it doesn't leave the Kelly family is incredible. And it's something that hasn't really been done before. And for me and David kind of say we're kind of new age male feminists, you know, we're trying to kind of, we're not, I suppose I kind of reiterate this as well, I'm not trying to tell women what to do or what they should or shouldn't do. I'm trying to kind of say, look, maybe stop putting everyone else in front of yourself and go and get your smear, and put your daughters under pressure to go and get them, because nobody should have to go through what Vicky went through and the level of pain she was in, because there are certain things that are dialogued throughout the triptych where if she had known the indicators and early signs of cervical cancer, she would have actually got screened sooner and she wouldn't have ended up, you know, as bad as she was. But it was obviously just, she just didn't know what to look out for. So that's what I'll dialogue as well through the middle part. So at the moment, myself and David are touring around the country, all because of David Brennan. And it's a huge, I suppose, privilege that somebody would see the value in the work to actually bring it around and to increase awareness. Because you have to remember, I'm very privileged to do what I do as a job and make a career from it. You know, the whole starving artist analogy, you know. I'm not starving. So some days along the way I was, but it kind of galvanised me to move on ahead. But to be able to do something socially active with it is a real dream, because it's something that I made my mind up I was going to do when I was 7, you know. And for someone like Vicky Phelan to come with the profile she has and what she does and the advocacy she does, and for her to see the value in what I'm trying to do is just an incredible honour. And to be able to stand here and speak, you know, and use my voice indirectly to use her voice, I'm just so happy, and I'm proud that she's proud, you know, and I just want to keep this going. And I want this painting to endure, and so does David, long after we're all gone, you know, because paintings are eternal, as we've seen with the Mona Lisa and all these kind of things. They last forever, and they're so non-confrontational. You can come up with your own experience of Vicky, or else you can sit here like you're going to sit here now, and you can get this whole extra experience and depth to what the painting actually is involved in the painting. So what I'll do is I'm going to take off the first panel, and then, like I said, I'll bring you through each piece individually. So occupied on the first panel is this big black horse. Now, the horse has a few different symbols. Symbolism. So symbolism is basically when the object means something more than what it is. It's not just the horse, it represents other things as well. So it was inspired by a part in the memoir, which is, I suppose, quite shocking. And in the memoir, Vicky outlines a situation that happened to her. After she had the 2 kids, she was suffering with postnatal depression from having Amelia, and then she had it with Dara as well. And she was in quite a bad depressive state at the time of this event occurring. And she was walking in Limerick. She had a baseball cap on, she had her headphones in, and she was walking towards this guy, and he had these 2 big massive dogs, and the dogs started to jump at Vicky as she was walking towards the dogs. And she kind of went, what the hell? So the guy was pointing behind her, and he told her to take her headphones out. She took her headphones out and looked behind her, and there was a massive black horse barreling down the road as if it was going to charge her down. So he said, I'll let the dogs off, they'll chase the horse away. So he did, he let the dogs off the leads, and they chased the horse away, and it got spooked and went off. So Vicky was really spooked by the whole thing herself, and she went, that's a bit strange. So she took the headphones out, and she kept going for her walk, and then she came to a roundabout, and the horse found her again at the roundabout, and it started to stamp at the ground. It kind of backed her into a corner, and it started to stamp at the ground as if it was going to charge her, and a car, a Mini Cooper, pulled up at the roundabout and threw the door open, leaned across the Mini Cooper, threw the door open, and told her to hop in. And she got into the car, and the horse chased them for 2 miles up the road. This black horse. And she went home and told her sister Lindsay about what happened, and Lindsay laughed at her and said, it didn't happen. And Vicky said, I'm telling you it happened. How would you make that up? How could you make something like that up? And I said to Vicky, after reading in the memoir, I said, what do you make of that horse? And she said, well, there's 2 reasons, she thinks, for the horse to do that. She said, one reason could be, and that's why you highlight the brain and the heart here, that the heart represents the compassion. So horses are now proven to be very good for therapy with people that are going through different anxieties, depression, especially people with intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, things like that, because they have a certain amount of empathy, like dogs, things like that. So it could have been the empathetic horse trying to console Vicky because she was so bad with depression at the time. And then you also have the intuition here, which is the brain as well, which said it also could have been, the brain indicates that it could have been, she could have presented as somebody who would abuse this horse because she wore the cap and she had her hair up and she didn't look like she usually did. It could have been somebody that abused this horse badly and the horse was trying to go and get her, you know. But I had said to her as well, I said, the black horse also kind of symbolises this cancer that was going to chase you through your whole adult life. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. She said, this black horse kind of represents the cancer. That's why it's occupying this panel all of its own, because most of her journey has been, I suppose, dictated by the cancer. And how we know her from seeing her on the steps of the High Court has been dictated by the cancer diagnosis and the cervical smear scandal as well. So I wanted to give it its own panel because it is a huge part of her life. But when I chose the pose for this, I just chose it because I liked compositionally how the pose looked. But when Philip Shepherd, who auctioned it off, we were in Durrow and I was talking through it, he went to somebody and showed them they're a horse expert, and he said, you know, that pose is actually the horse in retreat. And that horse isn't going to charge forward, it's actually been held back. And I said, well, he said, do you know that when you picked it? I said, no, I said, it was just more intuitive. I said, I just picked it because I liked how it looked. So when you see Vicky in the middle panel, she's kind of sitting there empowered, but she's holding this horse back. She's kept it at bay, like she's keeping it at bay now. I mean, she's defying all the odds when she said she wanted to go as far as she wanted. She's coming now whether we like it or not. That's Vicky all over. That's some reveal, isn't it? So essentially, like I said, you see her in the middle, and she's empowered, she's present, and this black horse has been held back. It's been completely held back. So what I'll do now is, without further ado, is I'll go into the middle of the and now you have the whole scene. You can see the beach and Doonbeg. So this emulates essentially what it looked like. Even that red on the horizon, that was there the night we were there. It just peeked out from the edge. And I mean, I'd said to her to keep an eye on the sky for a few nights afterwards, and there was no way we were going to get that same kind of coloration. It was incredible. So what you have here is Vicky in the central panel here. And what I've done is I have dialogued, I suppose, different things in her life throughout using the anatomy in her body. So what I'll do is I'll kind of go from head to toe, and I'll kind of, in doing so, talk about things that Vicky has gone through in her life. So Vicky has had an incredibly, I suppose, traumatizing medical history, which started off when she was 17 and had a car crash in France. And she was going, she'd come back from a disco with her then boyfriend at the time, Christophe, and there was 3 other people in the back of the car. And she was in France on work experience in school. And there was a guy self-medicating on the far side of the road, and he fell asleep behind the wheel of the car, and he went into them head on. And Vicky broke 70% of the bones in her body. She actually had a near-death experience. She actually went and was she'd seen her deceased grandmother, and her father and mother could hear her. It was either John or Gaby could hear her speaking. So she nearly passed, and her mother said if she had been in intensive care in Ireland, she just know whether she would have met it. Now that's not a reflection of maybe our medical system, but she said when she was in intensive care in France, there was one bed, and to every bed in intensive care there was one doctor. So she had her own doctor, and she had a tremendous amount of recovery there. And the people of Mooncoin raised money to bring her back because they had no money to bring her back. And this is where David Brennan comes into it. So here's how because David Brennan grew up around the corner from Vicky's home house. So he was in Vicky's life from a very young age. At one stage, he actually lived in the house with them. And he remembers Vicky coming back from that car crash. And when we unveiled this in Durrow, David Brennan wept in front of it because he remembers her coming back and how bad she was coming back from France. But he also remembers her running and jogging into the estate a year later because she was determined to get herself back on her feet. So this was the very start of the Vicky Phelan that we all know now, because he could not believe when he walked around, when he seen her running around the corner. He said, I cannot believe she's jogging. So she always had that in her, and we just seen it near the end. So she's an incredibly but powerful woman. But see the ribs here? You see the line coming down through? That represents the car crash in France. The brush has been kind of aggressively pushed down through the ribs where they are to show that breakage. But then you move along then as well, and near the next I suppose brush she had with a kind of a medical trauma was when her daughter Amelia was when she was pregnant with Amelia, she was doing gardening with her mother Gaby, and she had rubbed her eye, and they think a parasite got into her eye, and the parasite went down into Amelia as a fetus and started to interfere with Amelia's brain and her eye. And Vicky was on a tremendous amount of medication because of that, and Amelia was born with a tremendous amount of medication in her body. And she has a thing called toxoplasmosis, and she required a lot of help when she was born. And Vicky was on medication as well, but it led to Vicky having massive postnatal depression. And her mother Gaby kind of has outlined how bad that was at the stage it was. So then you move ahead then, and you have the cervical smear scandal and everything that goes with it. And I mean, what I do is as well is like, I mean, here you have the brain here from the side of her head. And in this, she's bald, but she has her hair as well. And this represents her intellect. It's up the side of her head, kind of like a laurel plant. You know, like the Greek plants up the side that represent people who are, I suppose, theologians or philosophical people. But intelligence as well is represented. She used her intellect and her, I suppose, educational background and more for IT to help her research how she was going to get different clinical trials and stuff. And that's how she came across Pembro. And we were in Merck Sharp and Dome, who make Pembro, and she really attributes Pembro to extending her quality of life. And it perfectly comes into her not losing her hair, because she was delighted to not have lost her hair because she was able to retain some of her femininity with not losing her hair. And unfortunately, she has that loss now, and it's coming back as jet black, which is you know, another thing as well. But that's why realism in portraiture stops the narrative, because I can show Vicky both with no hair and with her hair in the same space, which represents this duality of what she has to go through. You come into her eyes and they're kind of fixed on you, the viewer, because I mean, that's something that's very hard to explain, how you can get the eyes. I mean, I had to sit across from her for hours and hours and discuss and talk about things. So that's, if I didn't sit across from her and had to do it remotely over a Zoom, I wouldn't be able to get that expression in her eyes. And her face is very hard to do as well, because if you look at it on closer inspection, it's actually layered up. And that's because when I took photographs of her on the beach and doing begs, she didn't actually look like herself. She looked like Vicky, the housewife that we going around doing cooking or whatever, not the public Vicky with makeup on. So I had to superimpose the public Vicky onto the body of what we took on the beach. So that was quite a challenge to do as well. But if you look down into her vocal cords here, you have the infinity symbol. It's quite hard to see now from far away. But this represents me wanting for Vicky's voice to carry on long into the future, Because even though we're in it now at the moment, people will look back at Vicky Phelan and they'll say, this is a woman who changed the landscape of Irish medical history for women. And for men as well, because men need to be folded into this as well, to say, look, we need to be able to have the dialogue and talk about these things with women, and that will come down then we get down to the cervix, and she wants me to dialogue kind of what she had to go through with that surgery. But you have her 2 lungs here as well, and 2 lungs represent her advocacy, her using her voice to speak and advocate for women's health. One is connected into the breast where you have the milk ducts here because she breastfed both her kids, Darren and Amelia. I was very proud of that because we are very undersupported as a country of breastfeeders. And then you come into her generalised lung about women's health, and it's kind of blended into the rest of her body. And there's the top of the lung there, but it's vibrant, it's bright, and it's like her personality. It's, you know, vivacious and it's passionate. So you come down to her heart then as well. The back of her heart then is blue, and this represents the trauma she would have experienced in her adult life and her teenage life, car crash. And then you have the vibrant part of her heart, which is that thing that keeps her alive, that thing that keeps her enduring. And you have these cluster of shamrocks on top of her heart to represent the Irish people, kind of, I suppose, taking her into their hearts, and then it's kind of nestled on top that kind of comforts her, because when she was in America, she got a lot of, I suppose, value and comfort out of all the letters people were sending to her when she was in America. So that's what that represents. It represents kind of you, essentially, people in the room, the Irish people. And you come down then as well, you have the brain here, the shape of the brain, in where her gut is, which represents her intuition, because she said her intuition led her in a lot of the decisions that she made. So when she was in her GP's office and he said there's something not right about this smear, she grabbed the paper when the GP left, she grabbed the page straight away, took a photograph, and then went off and said, right, I'm going to sort this out now. And ultimately became one of the only women to not sign the gag order by the HSE, and ultimately we found her, that's how we came to know her on the steps of the High Court. So she credits, see the book in her lap here, there's the spine, and that there. She represents, or she credits her research ability to being able to find Pembroke and to be able to kind of source that, and for that to extend her standard of living. She is an absolute advocate for Pembroke, and we have Yvonne here she works in Merck Sharp and Dome, and we spoke about the guy that had Yvonne in his tonsils, wasn't it? Yeah. He had a tumour in his tonsils, and from using Pembroke, his cancer completely disappeared. And it shrunk Vicky's tumours 50%. So, I mean, this drug is a wonder drug. And it's made in Carlow. It's incredible. You know, and they make the HPV vaccine as well, which she's a huge advocate for as well. So we had a tour of Merck Sharp and Dome, and it was incredible to see this place that essentially, you know, extended Vicky's standard of living for so long. So you come down then into pelvic bone here in the pelvic region. Now, Vicky shattered her pelvis during that car crash in France as well, and she also broke her femur bone. Now, when we were featured on Nationwide with the painting, a woman contacted me, because I'm getting a lot of women that are contacting and reaching out with their stories, and she said, why did you paint the femur bone in so prominently? And as I painted that, I had no idea why I painted it in. In fact, I was sitting in front of the painting going, take out that femur bone, it's too up front there. And I'd be in the studio on my own talking to myself about the painting, soundboarding off myself. I think people didn't go half mad. And I said, no, leave it in. It's there, and it is what it is. And I only have a few minutes to change my mind anyway. But she said her mother's first symptom of cervical cancer was a broken femur, which comes down to lower bone density. And Vicky broke her femur during the crash as well. And Vicky didn't know that a broken femur was one of the early symptoms of cervical cancer. But you come into the central part here, and you have here where the cervix is. There's a few things that happened that Vicky didn't know how to look out for. So, for example, she was intimate with Jim at one stage. And after she was intimate, she had a letdown of blood. And she said the blood was a certain colour, that had she known what colour to look out for in the blood, she would have known it was near the indicator of cervical cancer, and she would have went and got screened sooner. So that colour is actually matched to the colour that she said, yeah, that's the colour of the blood, that's the colour it was. You come into it as well then, and she says a lot of women don't know what happens when you actually have the surgery, or you have the radiation. She said she felt like her insides had been melted. And she said if women knew how bad it was, they would just go for their smears. She said they just go for it, because she said women don't know, they're finding it out in the bathroom on their own, and she said it's not fair. And she said it's also important for men to hear it as well, so men can be there to support the women for going through this I suppose cycle, or to going through this surgery or this chemotherapy. And she said things happen like the pubic hair falls out. She said the cervix is lower to a point where penetrative sex becomes nearly impossible. The men want to be intimate with wives or partners. The woman wants to be intimate as well. She can't have penetrative sex, and it leads to the breakup of a lot of relationships because nobody is actually talking about it. And what's happening is they're having to deal with it all on their own, or through therapy, or by themselves, and she said it's impossible. And some things that have been said to these women that are going through this process by male consultants is absolutely outrageous. Outrageous. Because the male consultants, especially maybe up in the 60s, 70s, 50, 60, 70 years of age, don't really, I suppose, connect or understand with that. And that kind of comes back to our generational trauma, not being able to speak about things like menstruation with women and things like that and being ashamed. I mean, my 11-year-old daughter is now coming into, she's changing now. Her breasts are coming in, she's starting to have discharge, and she was able to walk down into the sitting room and speak to me and her mother about having discharge as if it was no big deal. Because it is no big deal. It is no big deal. She just was aware of her body. And Vicky is very much passionate about women and young girls being aware of their bodies from the point of menstruation. So they are comfortable coming and saying, something maybe isn't right here. I did a talk on this painting down in a school in Galway. And one girl was leaving, she's 17, one girl was leaving, and she came up to me afterwards on her own. She goes, that Vicky Phelan painting, she said, is after having an effect on me. And I said, in what way? And she said, my GP is giving me the runaround for the last 6 months and he won't give me a solid answer. And she goes, if he doesn't give me the answer the next time I'm in, she goes, I'm changing my GP. And she was having gynecological trouble. So that's just one girl that we needed to get that day. And that's what Vicky wants. She wants for, I suppose, for me and David to take over from the older male consultants to say, look, we're on the ground here and we're on the ground with you guys. And all we're trying to do is make sure you get ahead of this before you get this diagnosis where you're going to have it even harder. And that's what she's passionate about. And then you come along then down into the bottom of her foot and you have the colonnade of the High Court there under her foot. So that represents her High Court case. It's under her foot, she's crushed it, it's behind her, it's finished. And that's important. And she came up with the idea for that as well. And she came up with the idea for the Shamrocks, for the Irish people. So I came to her and said, Vicky, I don't know how I'm going to do the High Court case. It's so important. I said, I feel I can get myself tangled up in knots with the whole thing. I said, so what do you think? And she said, okay, leave it with me. And she came back and she said, pillars of the High Court, because that's where people came to see me. And she goes, I was so sick, Finn. She said, I was so sick addressing, you know, the cameras. She said at one stage, before the High Court case, before she found Pembroke, she had started to change colour. She said her tumours were so big in her stomach, it looked like she was pregnant. And as soon as she was on Pembroke, I think it was 2 weeks, total change around. She couldn't believe it. She said it was like a wonder drug. And she was a super receiver to the drug as well, which meant it worked even quicker. And that's why that was so important, because it was a change around for her and where we all came to know her. But I suppose the most important thing of her as a middle sitter in this as well is her 2 children. And to finish off about Pembroke as well, Pembroke is actually here being infused into her veins here. See it here? Coming up through her body is this gold. This kind of, I suppose, liqueur kind of going in and healing her body. She said she would go to get the infusion to Pembroke and she would walk in and she would go straight to her room and she would lie there and she would imagine it going in through her veins and going all through her body and healing her and making her better. She had to visualise it going in through her body. And she said that was, she thinks that may have helped her. But that's why it was important to put it in as well. She said, I want to show Pembroke some way physically because it was important to her and that's how it's in there. But like I said, the most important thing in this middle panel are kind of in her 2 hands. So you have her marriage to Jim here, which is represented as the wedding band around her finger, which ultimately led to the most important thing in her life, which was her 2 children, which are in her 2 hands. So you have her daughter Amelia as a bird, because she said Amelia is a free spirit. She's like her. She kind of doesn't ever want to be reined in. She wants her to kind of, I suppose, spread her wings and fly and not be caged. So this is a crimson rosella. And the crimson rosella is a bird that is notoriously against being caged. So that's why I picked that bird. Now this is a crimson rosella in its adolescent years. So that's why it's the green and the gold. And when it's in its adulthood, it turns into the brightest red and blue. So it'll totally change. And that's why that bird represents her daughter. And then you have her son Dara as a sapling oak. And this is because Dara is the Irish word for oak tree. So the idea is that eventually she'll walk off this panel, or she'll walk off this painting, and she'll go and plant this sapling oak where she wants it to grow into this big, strong tree. A big, strong tree she isn't going to actually be around to see grow into what she wants it to grow into, which is Dara. And I mean, you don't really see it here, but actually in her palm, there is a coin. and the coin represents they were in Kildare village once, and Dara made a wish in the well that his mother with cancer would disappear, and put it into the well. And what could she say to him, essentially? I mean, what could anyone say to their child? But what she did say was, which was something that she was adamant was going to be in the portrait, was she had a star up in the sky. Now that star, strangely enough, represents Star Wars. Now, this is important because this was how she told Dara she had cancer. Because she used the analogy of Star Wars to say, my cancer is like the Death Star, this thing that's going to destroy everything. And the Jedi are the doctors with the lightsabers that are going to lance it away. And she said that made it so much more tangible for him, that it made it easier for him to understand what it was. And then as he got older, she was able to feed him more information as it came along as to what the severity of the thing was. And I mean, that was very important for her to put in. Another thing that I did as well, when I painted the background initially, the tide was actually, see where her foot is here? The tide was down here. And in this painting, I've actually pushed the tide back because it was too low down. And it's almost trying to manifest, giving Vicky more time and pushing this tide back. Now, we can't physically push the tide back, it's physically impossible, but I could do it in a painting. And even I went as far as to paint her tumours on around her aorta and take them off with a scalpel to manifest, you know, healing these tumours, that when she went to America, they would shrink even more. But sadly, that wasn't happening, and we all know kind of what her prognosis is going forward. So the tumours have been taken off as bits of paint and they're put in different boxes, and I've kept them, you know, for future, for posterity. So she's rooted into the sand here. See her foot in the sand, and in the actual bottom where it's painted, I took sand out of the beach in Doonbeg from the photo shoot, and I actually mixed sand into the paint. So actually Doonbeg is here in the room with us, and it'll be there forever. So it's actually set into the painting. You can see the texture in certain lights. Not that I invite anyone to touch it. I don't invite anyone. David Brennan would not be happy with anyone touching the painting. But it's there, and it's there forever. It's trying to kind of preserve that, I suppose, thing. But I suppose the poignancy of it being set into the beach is she's rooted into the sand. She doesn't want to go anywhere. She wants to stay, and that's represented by having her foot in. But nothing on the beach can ever stay. It's always going to be brought back out with the tide. And that's what makes it, I suppose, such a powerful and, I suppose, sad setting for the painting. And her parents are here as well as these two trees under her hands to represent all the help she got from her parents with the two kids. Just there's the green and the little lines down there. Now, some people say it looks like sand run through her fingers as well. So it really depends on what the viewer sees. You know, I'm just giving my intention of what it was, but people will kind of see it as different things. Vicky saw this, the sand run through her fingers, and ultimately a testament to her time. So that finishes out the central panel here with Vicky. And then the last panel then is the white horse. So the white horse is different symbols as well, just like the first one. So it could represent the white horse Tiernan Og. So as I was painting this, like I said, she was on the way to America. So essentially the land of youth, or youth obsessedness. But in this case, she was going for medical trial that would extend her standard of living if it worked. And sadly, it didn't. So this is kind of trying to manifest, I suppose, as well. The reins on it represent as well that it may be the clinical trial, that she could get on this horse. She has a certain rein on it again, where there's no reins on this black one. The black one is uncontrolled, meaning the cancer can do whatever it wants when it chooses. And we don't know what Vicky's doing mentally to keep that at bay. But you essentially want this horse to take Vicky away and then bring her back to the shores of Ireland, back to us. You know, somewhat healed, somewhat extended her life. But it could also represent the old analogy of death rides on a pale horse, that this is death that's come for her. And at the time of painting this as well, she was advocating for the Dying with Dignity bill, where if she got to a certain stage of her illness, even though she wouldn't be able to bring through the legislation that quickly, is that anyone going through what she was essentially facing down the barrel of, or like my uncle passed away, my uncle Darren passed away from cancer at 40, and his child had to endure seeing him just get worse and worse and worse. So this could have been this horse coming to take her on her own terms, you know, if that bill had gone through, but sadly it wouldn't be, but it's there kind of for that idea as well. But this horse looks back, whatever horse it is, at Vicky with empathy in its eyes, like a life well lived, and a life of service to the women of this country, and to the people of this country as well. And it's looking back at her, and it's looking at her in pride, as a sitter in the portrait. And then you come down into the still life. And this, I suppose, symbolises part of our medical history, a medical journey. The candle represents a brevity of life, that essentially we all have a candle that's burning, and the candle can be snuffed out like that. It's not just because Vicky has cancer, it's because our life is so precious and we need to live it as best we can, moving into everything forward. And this is supposed to be a painting of hope for people to come up to it and say, God, Vicky was through so much, and look at what she did. And look what I can do with my diagnosis, my prognosis. Look at what I can do for people that are in the same situation. It's not supposed to make anybody upset or sad. It's supposed to, I suppose, raise awareness so that women will go and get their smears sooner, and essentially that it can actually save lives. We want this painting to save people's lives, and for it to be a painting of hope, and for it to be a painting of awareness. But here you have the candle, like I said, representing brevity life. It's more precarious because it's beside the ocean, so it can be snuffed out a little bit easier. And then you have this red tissue paper. Now this represents as well that Vicky said at one stage after her after getting the surgeries that her labia were so tender that sometimes if she went and urinated, she would just wipe and her labia would tear and leave her in agony for days. So women don't know this kind of stuff. And she said they knew how bad it was. She said they would go and get their smears quicker. And so people just don't talk about it. And that's why she wanted to put that in here as well. You have the delicate fabric to represent, I suppose, femininity as well. You have the mushrooms to represent different infections, fungal infections that women should be aware of from the point of menstruation. You have the sanitary pad here to represent knowing that and being aware of your body from the point of menstruation. You have the lemon here, which represents, and the fig beside it to represent the bittersweetness of a diagnosis. So even though Vicky got her diagnosis and she knew what she was facing into, what was it for her anyway? She just knew what she was dealing with. It didn't make it any better or any worse, just made it bittersweet. And then you come along then into the stethoscope, which represents the doctors in the medical profession that she so admires, the people that helped her along. But in here you have the eggplant or the aubergine. Now that represents the male phallus, right? So it represents the penis. And the reason this is important is because this reflects what some of these male consultants said to Vicky and said to these other women. A lot of women affected by the cervical smear scandal, 221 plus women. What they said, and I put it in there and I sliced it to represent it. Just because what a male consultant has between his legs doesn't mean he's indispensable. He needs to actually be more professional and project himself in a more professional way in order to be there to emotionally and physically support these women and what they're going through, and not be arrogant in his gender or in his appendage, because he's not indispensable. There's plenty more consultants out there. So it's really a call to the men, just to say, especially if you're in the professional sphere, just have a bit more professionalism. Because some of the stuff I've said to these women, I actually couldn't repeat horrendous stuff. So Vicky was shocked I put that in, and I said, well, sure, Vicky, I mean, what do you mean I'm shocking you? I said, how can I shock you? And she goes, yeah, but that's a big statement. I said, but it's something that I think needs to be talked about. I think something needs to be brought to awareness. And then you have her friend Ruth, who also passed away with the cervical smear scandal. She used to sign off her messages with a blue butterfly, and that's how she knew it was Ruth. So when she looks at this painting, she can see her friend Ruth, or she can just see a butterfly. Or she can look at that butterfly and she can meditate, or she can think about Ruth and think about her friendship with Ruth, and she can think about the good times they had, what they went through together. And then you have the roses, which represent all the Irish roses that are going through cervical cancer or cancer at the moment, and it's there in solidarity with all the women that are going through this at the moment. You have the medical, scientific medicine here as the pill packet, and you have a dowser here as well, which represents holistic medicine. So a dowser is this crystal that you put in your hand and it tells you either yes or no. So Vicky is a fan of holistic medicine. She is quite spiritual, and she kind of likes she got the relic of Padre Pio as well, when she came up to see me in the studio. And I didn't tell her until she came up that my middle name is actually Pio. So when Vincent Pio, James Devine, I picked James to try and be normal. It's never going to be normal name. It was written in, and I'm named after Vincent van Gogh as well. Never going to be just a stripper. So it could say it was written in the stars. So that finishes out that part of the still life. And then finally, to finish off the triptych, you have these footprints going off the edge of the canvas. So you have Vicky's footprints and you have the hoof prints. And that represents, we don't know which horse is going to take her. At this stage, and at the stage of painting this, we didn't know which horse was going to take her. Was the horse of Tyrannol going to take her and extend her life a little bit more, or was the black horse going to come and take her? But what she does is she walks off on her own terms off the side of the canvas. But her heel is here on the very, very, very edge to show she walks off on her own terms, she stays empowered, and at this stage we didn't know what the future held. And we still don't know what the future holds. But one thing we do know is this is a woman who has forever changed the landscape of this country medically, and we owe her a huge debt, and that's stripped.
Well,
So if any of you have any questions, I can take a few questions if you want to know a few things, or have I covered it all? Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well, I'll pass you over to Lauren then, and listen, thanks again so much for your time.